right, you're looking live right now at the Senate Banking Committee hearing. As we have emphasized, there are 19 senators in the Senate. Each of them have the right to make some sort of an opening statement before we hear the formal testimony and then go to the question and answer session with the testimonies, shall we say. Ben Bernanke, Henry Paulson, Mr. Lockhart, as well as Chairman Cox. So that's where we are right now in the midst of those preambles. We'll get you in there the moment the testimony begins. But right now, Mark and I are joined by Steve Leisman. Steve, one question I just wanted to raise here. You know, I've taken some time over the past few days to talk to investors in other parts of the world that have been supplying us and our banks with much-needed capital. And the impression that I've gotten is they're as shocked as we are. They are in some ways more optimistic than anyone here is, but perhaps most important, they really bet on the announcement of this plan being some sort of a watershed moment and a panacea, and they seem very shocked that things aren't starting to get better. In a sense, that's a little concerning, because I know, as you've been talking about, it's going to be a very long time till we get more clarity here, especially on who's going to put their assets in, what they cost. That does not happen overnight.
You know, Aaron, I'm struck, just if I may aside here for a moment, at the apparent dissonance of what's going on here. You're looking at Henry Paulson, who has been basically barricaded in his offices and on the telephone, working through the nights on a crisis, and Ben Bernanke doing about the same. They're standing in front of people who feel they have time to play politics. And I can't imagine what's going through his mind right now as he sits there patiently listening to what is happening of the people in front of him.
Do you really think that these speeches were playing politics? I was impressed by the fact that they all emphasized it needs to be done very, very quickly, but here are the things we want to say. I was actually impressed at, frankly, their eloquence and their relevance.
You know, Aaron, I don't disagree with that. I'm just thinking here, you know, personally, I have trouble sitting for 5 minutes to do television. But the idea that they're sitting there going through these long-winded speeches, and I think you kind of get at something, Aaron. Maybe the foreign investors that you're talking to are a little bit savvier about the process. For example, Bob Pisani just did a report about how guys on the floor were talking about Shelby. And tell me if I'm wrong here, but I'm hearing that Shelby is not the key player here. He may be the ranking Republican on the banking committee, but he has made opposing remarks for the past several days, and I'm not sure that what he just said in his statement is new. I think, again, I come around to what I've said earlier today. The key moment was Thursday night. All the leaders of the House and the Senate, the Republicans and Democrats, stood behind Paulson and agreed we need to do something. That should tell markets something's going to get done. And the rest, you know, I'm not sure how much all the details matter. Is there going to be some forbearance for foreclosure? Probably. Is there going to have this executive compensation thing? Yeah, but my guess is Paulson doesn't let it get in the way of the ultimate goal here, which is injecting capital into the markets.
Mark, I have to say, though, the more it does seem the details matter, at least in certain crucial elements, like some sort of oversight that will work to ensure taxpayers are being protected, that their money is going to be well spent. I mean, that is important, Steve. I wouldn't marginalize that.
I'm not disagreeing that that's important. What I'm saying is this is a binary thing. It's 0 or 1. 0, the government doesn't put money in. 1, the government does put the money in.
But we know they're going to put the money in.
And if they do so in such a way that creates oversight, you know, I don't think that derails the general purpose here, which is that they're going to go in there and inject liquidity and buy troubled assets.
Mark?
I mean, that's the
I disagree. I mean, it's not 0 or 1. Yeah, you have to pick where you're going to put the money. As I pointed out, I still think they're on the wrong track. The mortgage assets, forget them. Encase them in concrete like Chernobyl. Steve, what are we going to do if when the auctions start and we're buying up these troubled mortgage assets, it turns out the actual prices are lower than we thought? You could trigger a whole new round of bank failures. This could wind up a disaster.
Yeah.
But if you stay away from the mortgage assets, if you go into the commercial paper market and back the garden variety CDOs, you don't open that can of worms, and you keep Main Street going. I don't buy this argument that you have to save Wall Street to save Main Street. You want to find Main Street? It's right over there. Don't go there via Wall Street.
You know, Mark, I appreciate your thoughts here. I would just like to point out that we're not debating here the Mark Haynes plan, if I might. We're not debating the Mark Haynes plan. What you're suggesting here,
we're debating the Paulson plan, which I think is wrong.
And I suggest
am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
And am I not allowed? I mean, I'm trying to, excuse me, but there are a lot of people out in the media who are doing nothing but criticize. I'm at least proposing a solution.
That's good.
So I don't want to be knocked for trying to be helpful here.
My point is, the point I want to make, Mark, is it strikes me, and I happen to know that what we're talking about here is auction theory and all kinds of game theory, and I know that they're thinking about this already. But what you are suggesting is that game theory be written into congressional legislation, which is not and should not happen. How they run these auctions...
There are a lot of things happening here that shouldn't be happening.
Right. How they run these auctions in a way to maximize what they're trying to do is something they're going to figure out in the regulations, but it's not going to be written into congressional legislation.
With all due respect, Steve, something shouldn't happen is an argument that no longer applies here. We're overboard. We're swimming in shark-infested waters, and we're doing a whole bunch of stuff that shouldn't happen.
Take a step back and ask yourself if you really want Congress debating the process by which the government should be purchasing mortgage-backed securities.
No, I don't want that.
So
I'm
then
merely
you have to stop
pointing
right
out.
there. I win the argument, Mark.
I'm merely... Oh, well, if it's important for you to win the argument, I'll concede. You win the argument. That doesn't change the fact that this could open up a serious can of worms.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And how they execute this is absolutely critical.
Steve, can I ask one question here? What you're talking about, obviously, is the pool, how you set the prices, all of that. Okay, but then there's another side to this discussion, right, which is the fact that even if you get this off the bank's books, a lot of them need more money. They need more capital. And last I checked, that is becoming scarcer everywhere around the world. A lot of those sovereign wealth funds have been burnt. A lot of them are taking their money now and investing it in their own markets because we've seen crises from places like Moscow to Kuwait. Where are we going to get the money needed to recapitalize here, which is just as important in terms of stimulating new lending as getting rid of bad loans is?
I think it's an excellent question, Aaron, but I think there's two answers to that. The first is, in a way, this is capital. Think about what the government's doing. It is giving you money for assets on your books. So the two things that happen is, one, the assets come off the books, which frees up capital there, and two, you no longer have to reserve against these assets and the unknown potential there. The second thing is, if you can put a floor in the free fall we've had in the credit markets these days, then perhaps you can begin to return confidence and people can step in and find, I think the key point here is the franchise value. What happened critically to Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley is it was found there was no franchise value. Market cap came down to book value, so all that happened is the value of the company was equal to the perceived value of the assets, and it was falling further. The market has to get a sense there's a floor here and can start to figure out franchise value, and that brings in capital. But you can't do that in a free fall.
All right, David Faber is here.
To your point, Aaron, though, many of these banks, and this is the key question, where are the marks versus the market? And will the federal government, and whatever device they're using here, reflect market realities or their own reality? And so, Steve, the question is, what is the write-down associated with a particular asset that you are going to be giving them? If it is a large write-down, you are not ultimately creating capital. You're creating a loss, which is going to be charged against your capital, for which you need to replenish. Hence, Aaron's point about potentially the need to raise capital or generosity on the part of the federal government, which is not reflective necessarily of the market price of some of these securities, but is more than that, and therefore does not require these institutions to go out and raise new capital because perhaps the government's going to come even above their marks.
And
of course, that also lends itself to the question of the marks themselves, which gets to the point of confidence because we've had marks all over the place. Lehman Brothers was marking stuff nowhere near where everybody else was in terms of the discount.
Let me lower the heat a little bit with my friend Mark Haynes in the following way. Mark, I have been on the phone with the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, desperate to get them to explain to me exactly what you've talked about. I am told that they are happy to talk about it after the legislation is passed because they cannot see this being inside the legislation. It is too complicated, and Congress is not going to deal with it, Mark, okay?
What's too complicated?
Just what David's talking about and the process by which you will run these apparently reverse auctions and how you strike the balance.
As far as I know, I don't know why you keep casting it this way. Neither David nor I, as I understand what David is saying, are calling for this to be defined in the legislation. All we're doing is pointing out what could be unintended consequences. And that's all. Am I right, David?
No, I agree. I agree. That's what you're doing. I'm just...
Steve, what about some color on the other thing, though, that happened Sunday night and didn't get a whole lot of discussion, which is when Hank Paulson announced this, he made it very, very clear that he was talking about the root of all problems is housing, and that's the problem. And then all of a sudden it turned out we could see other troubled assets like credit cards and loans, auto loans, any other kind of loan put into this pool as well.